Today we're speaking with Dr. Dimitrios Vasilakis, recently an adjunct lecturer at National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. Dr. Vasilakis has published on Neoplatonism, including Platinian methodology and hermeneutics, philosophy or history of philosophy, and Neoplatonic Providence and Descent, a test case from Proclus Alcibiades commentary. But today we'll be discussing his recent book, Eros in Neoplatonism and Its Reception in Christian Philosophy. That's from 2020, which focuses on Plotinus, Proclus, and Dionysius the Areopagite. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Vasilakis. To start off, would you mind giving us just an overview of your book and the purpose of it?
Thank you very much. So it's an honor for me to be here in this virtual realm, but of course we can have discussion. This is what matters. So so the structure of the book is quite simple, I would say. It is also typically Neoplatonic in that it has a triadic structure. So I engage with three philosophers already mentioned: Plotinus, Proclus, and Dionysius the Areopagite. So for all these three figures, love or Eros is very important as a notion. We could say that is one of the central notions for their philosophical systems. So I am treating some specific texts which have to do especially with Eros. In Plotinus' case, this is the treatise 3.5 on love, and there one can say various things. For example, Plotinus gives an allegorical interpretation of the myth of the birth of Eros in the Symposium. In any case, apart from this, the important thing is that Eros for Plotinus has to do with reversion. So that is for the with the return, say, of soul to the intelligible realm and then to the one. Of course, recently we've had another book by Bertozzi on Plotinus on Eros, and he has a quite different approach to mine, but I think that in the end there are some similarities, and we could discuss about this in what follows. Now, then, there is an interesting dialectic and tension with Proclus, the most important systematizer, I assume, of Neoplatonism in the 5th century AD, in that, of course, he holds on to the notion of reversive Eros, Eros as return, but then he also proposes that there is another aspect of Eros, and that has to do with providential Eros, or we can term it as descending Eros, not only ascending as in Plotinus. So it is very interesting to see whether there is a strong conflict between the two figures, or actually whether Proclus explicates something that it is implicit in Plotinus. I think that the latter option is the right one. We don't have here a very serious conflict between the two philosophers, I would say, but in any case, of course, the elaborations of Proclus are very important. And now that we have this pair of descending and ascending Eros, we have this bridge that can get us to Dionysius the Areopagite, who exploits very similar and in some cases identical language to Proclus. So he has this notion of reversive and providential Eros. And then, of course, the question is whether he has taken everything from Proclus, or whether he has a Christian background, which would give some different meanings in what Proclus has to say about this topic. Again, my view is that predominantly Dionysius is a Christian thinker who is, of course, indebted to the terminology and metaphysical schemes of pagan Neoplatonism. And yeah, as I said before, so in its chapter, we see how much important Eros is in order to understand the philosophy of each of these figures, but also when we attempt to give a meaning to life, then again, we see how much Eros is important. So this as an overview, I hope it is okay, it suffices.
Sure. One of the things you mentioned at the beginning of your Dionysius chapter, which is the chapter we're most interested in here, was this accusation that Dionysius is essentially plagiarizing Proclus. Could you unpack that accusation a bit and what your reply to it is?
Yes, of course. So I've already hinted to this issue. So it is a kind of vexed theme. Let's go, let's say, quickly a bit. So in the Acts, so the book of the New Testament, 1734, we get this information that when Paul came to Athens, he gave a very important speech, and some of the people there converted to Christianity. And we get the names of Dionysius from Areopagus, the Areopagite, and Damaris. Now, we have in the tradition, the patristic tradition, some very important and influential writings that are ascribed to this person, Dionysius the Areopagite. Actually, the author himself gives us many information in order to for us to say that he lived in the apostolic times. But if someone considers the language, the conceptual framework, we'll see that it would be almost impossible for a human person to live at that point. Actually, in the in the end of the 19th century, we have scholars like Stiegelmeier and Hugo Koch, who made some very close comparisons between the text of Proclus and Dionysius, and actually one can see there that the similarities, the affinities are so many that this author of the Areopagitic corpus must have lived in a contemporary time to Proclus. Perhaps he was a student of Proclus, we don't know, or a bit after him. So for this reason, we situate the author towards the end of the 5th and the beginning of the 6th century. Again, in terms of manuscript tradition, the oldest manuscripts are in Syriac. So we assume that this author was in Syria, perhaps a monk. We have also the version of the Greek text also in Syrian, and there is a project now that we have the text edited in this language as well. In any case, due to these similarities, as I said, we can be sure that the author did not live in the apostolic time. Actually, if we go back to the patristic age, for example, John of Scythopolis, Maximus the Confessor, and other people, of course, think that Dionysius the Areopagite is a great father of the church, but okay, they hold on to the idea that he lived in the apostolic time. Then from the Renaissance onwards, for example, Lorenzo Valla also proved that Dionysius could not have lived in the apostolic times. This meant that people would then be critical towards what Dionysius wrote, that is in the Protestant and in the Roman Catholic milieu. In any case, in the Orthodox tradition, the Eastern tradition, Dionysius was always a very important figure till the 20th century. At that point, because of course Orthodox scholars would discuss more with people from Europe, or then in America, started also sharing a critical attitude towards Dionysius. In any case, I think we can safely assume that the author of this corpus is a very important author. In any case, he was influenced by Proclus. Now, the question is, was he a plagiarizer of Proclus after having situated him after Proclus? And now here we have many approaches to this issue. I've already referred to some examples. So we find identical vocabulary, many notions that seem to be at least of the same framework, I believe. And in my research, this is what I try to do. Of course, there are many other people who try to do this, and in a much better way than I do it. In any case, they think that, of course, there are these similarities, but if we look closer, we will see that there are many, many details that could differentiate Dionysius from Proclus, and that actually, if we see the different background that Dionysius proposes, then even identical vocabulary, for example, the notion of Eros, okay, could have different connotations in these two philosophers, that is Proclus and Dionysius. So my stance is that, of course, we have many similarities. Dionysius is indebted to pagan Neoplatonism, but he was not a plagiarizer. Of course, there are other people that have other opinions, but I think this is also has to do with the interest in Dionysius. Many people can read what they want in Dionysius. I think this has to do with a very interesting way that he writes.
Okay, thank you. Now, well, still on this topic, so somebody that Sam and I have been reading recently is Eric Pearl. We've been reading his book, Theophany, and he argues that the metaphysics between Plotinus, Proclus, and Dionysius is essentially the same, including with regard to Eros. So can you, I don't know, tell us what you think of his argument? You would reject his conclusion, I think, that they're essentially the same in the metaphysics. Is that right? Yes,
that's true. I think also Professor Pearl has already talked to your series, or will talk something like this, I have seen. In any case, Eric Pearl is a great scholar. One cannot say anything about this, and of course I have benefited myself many times from his excellent articles. As I have understood it, he has changed a bit the way he approaches some texts. So comparing his start with his PhD on Maximus the Confessor and, for example, the book Theophany, as you mentioned. So I would say that I understand him, and the purpose of the book is excellent. Of course, his analyses are also very interesting. I do think that if one wants an introduction to Neoplatonism, Dionysius is a very good place to start. But I'm afraid, yes, that I wouldn't like to say that whether you take Plotinus or Proclus or Dionysius, actually you get to the same result. So this is something that I'm not very confident, let's say, with this. So one thing is that I believe that in contrast to what Perl said in his earlier writings, for example, an article on hierarchy in Dionysius, an excellent article, or his PhD on maxims of the confession, I think that at that time, he used to think that Christology, for example, is important to Dionysius. I think now he has denigrated this a bit. On my behalf, I believe that, for example, and we can talk about this in what follows, Christology is important to Dionysius, and therefore this is not very pagan Neoplatonic. So in this sense, I believe that we do miss something from Dionysius if we think that he is just a replica or a very good expounder of expositor of Neoplatonic philosophy by Plotinus or Proclus. So his book is very important, of course. He's a great scholar, whether we speak about his earlier writings or about the writings from Theophany onwards and all this. But yes, my approach is a bit slightly different than his.
Well, why don't we, I don't know, take that a little bit farther and get into some more of the philosophical issues here. So you talk about the Trinity too in your book, and as I understand it, you use Dionysius's comments on the Trinity and the similarity to how he describes procession to argue that the Trinity is a model for Eros in Dionysius. Is that right? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for this question. Now, let me say also some things as introduction. Now, if one wants to understand Dionysius, of course, one needs to be aware of the patristic tradition, of the pagan Neoplatonism. But apart from this, one needs also to be aware of the patristic tradition prior to Dionysius. That's one thing. Now, if one reads, for example, Athanasius or St. Gregory, the theologian, will ascertain that there are some things that demarcate pagan Neoplatonism for Christianity, and these are very important to these authors. For example, the dialectic between uncreated God and created cosmos, the creatures, one thing. Or, of course, God as Trinity versus God as only a monad in pagan Neoplatonism. So there is all this dogmatic, doctrinal discussion before the years that we situate Dionysius, and with Dionysius' writings, we can say that we witness a kind of shift of emphasis. So in the corpus as we have it, we don't see that he wants to lay emphasis on these issues that for other fathers are of paramount importance. So for example, the word uncreated, we will not find it in the corpus, for example, or we will not see similar concerns. Now, of course, this is also consonant with his attempt to show that he lived in the apostolic times. But of course, this is not true with respect to the advanced Neoplatonic vocabulary he uses. In any case, with respect to Trinity, now, in the beginning of the work, so there are, the beginning, I mean, of the divine names, okay, this is one of the extant writings of the corpus. So we have the two hierarchies, right? The celestial and the ecclesiastical one. These are not perhaps the titles of Dionysius, but it doesn't matter. We have the divine names. That is a treatise about the names ascribed to God in the scripture. Of course, here we see also names that the pagan Neoplatonic tradition has ascribed to divinity. We have also the mystical theology and 10 epistles. So that's the corpus. Dionysius has also some reference to other works that one could say that are lost, but perhaps they are just fictitious. He wants to make just a picture that he had a greater corpus than what we have. In any case, so Dionysius treats God as Eros in the divine names. And in the beginning, he has some introductions, and he talks about methodology. So within this section of his work, he warns the reader that he is not going to deal with names that have to do, for example, with God per se, but only with respect to God in his relation to the cosmos. So he does not care that much about Trinity, saying that this has to do with intra-divine relations, but only with outward relation of divinity with the cosmos. Since this is the topic, let's say, of the book, we can understand that Dionysius would not include many references to the Trinity. He does include some very important of them, again, in this introduction to the book. But for example, when he treats gods as Eros, he does not relate his remarks with the fact that the Christian God is a Trinity. That's one thing. Now, with respect to Dionysian hermeneutics, I do believe, and actually I have a forthcoming also article on this about the hermeneutics of Dionysius. I believe Dionysius writes in such a way so that he engages the reader with the problems posed, and so that the reader can also take part in this conversation, let's say, with what the author proposes. Having said this, while reading the sections on God as Eros, I found some references to the divine processions, prodoi, that is, of the divinity. Now, these divine processions are used within context where Dionysius describes the creation, so to speak. Again, creation is not a word, demurgia, for example, that Dionysius uses, but in any case, for the sake of our conversation now, he has so a context about creation, and so we speak about creatures. These divine processions have, as a result, the creation and sustainment of the cosmos. However, in these cases, in this book, and especially in the introduction, when we have references and to the Trinity, there he also uses the same concept, divine procession, prodos, in order to speak about theogony, theogonia, that is, about God as Father, Son, and Spirit. And I do believe that because we have two different contexts, but also because we have identical vocabulary, that actually we are invited to think that if we want to understand Trinity, we need to also invoke Eros. And if we want to understand what is going on with Eros and creation in the sections about God as Eros, then we need also to invoke Trinity. And I believe that if we do so, we can also find some also interesting answers in some puzzles that sometimes the text proposes to us. Does this answer to your question, or perhaps I could say something more in detail?
Well, no, it does answer the question, but well, another big issue in Dionysius, and something that seems like it's different from Proclus and Plotinus, is this idea of ecstasy. Would you argue that the notion of the Trinity allows Dionysius to think of Eros as a kind of ecstasy, a descending Eros from God to creatures in a way that Plotinus and Proclus can't? I mean, this term ecstasy does show up, I believe, in Plotinus, but only as an ascending ecstasy. Is that right?
Exactly. Yes, that's true. So this is one of the innovations of Dionysius, that he uses the term without caring about the direction. So whether it is downwards or whether it is upwards. Yes, it's true. We see ecstasy, for example, in Plotinus with respect to a soul and its return to the one. Now, we don't see this limitation in Dionysius. It is true that Dionysius connects descending Eros, that is, the Eros that God has for the cosmos, with ecstasy. Ecstasy is a concept, let's say, alternative or a description, alternative of the Eros of God. Now, why doesn't Dionysius care about the direction of ecstasy? I think we can find an answer, as you also hinted to, if we invoke the Trinity. So actually, Dionysius uses a scheme, but he elaborates a bit on this, that we find also in Proclus. So we have an entity that has a feature that characterizes it. For example, it has Eros, and this is a mode of existence or an existential mode. There are also entities which are the causes of these entities that are in this existential mode. So we have also the causal mode. We have the causal mode, the existential mode, and we have also the mode according to participation. That is, we have some entities that participate in these entities that have a feature, for example, Eros. Now, we see that Dionysius uses the existential mode and the causal mode as identical with respect to God. And in my approach, I think that he can do that. Proclus does not do that. He can do that exactly because God can be seen with respect to his interrelations, intertrinitarian relations, i.e., God as Trinity and God as in relation with creation. I do believe that this helps us in order to understand why Dionysius identifies these two modes. If we do so, and if if we accept that Trinity is behind the causal mode in Dionysius, then yes, we can see that God, without any reference to creation, is already a relation. He is the relation of three persons. In that sense, he is already Eros by sharing himself between these three hypostases. Now, if we say this, then we can say that the mode of God's being is this kind of sharing himself with another. And in this case, then, we can understand why ecstasy does not have any particular direction in Dionysius, because apart from this causal mode, in the existential mode, we see that God wants to share himself with creation. And I think that this is why Trinity can give us a clue as to why ecstasy does not have any particular direction. Now, in Plotinus and Proclus, where our archetype, our God, is just one, a monad, then there we have some other mechanics in the system, let's say. But in the case of Dionysius, yes, exactly, I do believe that the Trinity explains why God also is ecstatic.
Thank you. There's a lot to think about there. So if this argument works, then Dionysius would be able to unify these two kinds of love and be able to explain how love is both ascending, and to go back to the foundational text for the Neoplatonists, the Symposium, how love is both a desire and a deficiency, but also sort of giving and not a deficiency. Well, I've been talking for a while here. There's more I could say for sure, but does anyone else have any questions about what we said so far? Sam or Mr. Bennett? The other Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, if I could just quickly. So, yeah, thanks, Marcus and Dimitrios. Yeah, so you mentioned, yeah, that God wants to share himself with creation. And so would you say that God's desire to share himself with creation, do you think that that would be a mystery, or would we say maybe that, like, well, I guess maybe there's three options. I don't know what you think, but maybe you could say that that's a mystery that he wants to share himself, or maybe it's fitting that he would want to share himself because he's a Trinity, or maybe even more extreme, someone might say that because he's a Trinity, it's necessary that he would share himself. But yeah, I guess I wonder what you'd think about that. Is it ultimately just a mystery to us why he would want to share himself?
Yes, thank you, Sam. So for sure, God is a mystery. Yes, exactly. It's a mysterium tremendum, fascinans. So yes, God as monad and Trinity, it's something antinomical, something that it's very difficult for the human mind to accept. That's one thing. Now, if we grant, however, the thesis, and here, of course, we can discuss why and on which grounds one would accept this. This is not only a philosophical issue, of course, it's theological also. In any case, once we do this, I believe then that we can understand why some things are as they are. And for example, yes, we could explain the act of creation, this kind of God sharing himself with others. Yes, we could invoke for this Trinity. Now, there's another thing. You also said that perhaps one could say that if it is so, then creation is a kind of necessary thing. Of course, we believe that God, we believe, I mean, the patristic tradition wants to say that God is free when creating the world. Now, I think that all these discussions are very interesting, and we may find some answers in fathers who admire Dionysius and try to interpret Dionysius. So, for example, this is a major issue in Maximus the Confessor. Now, Maximus the Confessor is a great admirer of Dionysius, and in many of his works, he provides exegesis of many difficult passages from Dionysius. So I think, again, this is an aspect of Dionysius' way of writing, that he has not settled all these questions. Perhaps he's not interested in this kind of doctrinal development of these questions. Other fathers have done this, again, invoking Dionysius. But I am not sure that we will find exactly the answers to this. So whether it is so or something else, I believe that in a way, all these three options are in a way in Dionysius. And this is why also we have a great discussion, for example, of these things in St. Maximus the Confessor, and of course in John of Damascus, and so on. So I do believe that God is a mystery, and also Dionysius believes this. Actually, the mystical theology starts with a prayer to the Trinity, God as Trinity. I do believe that it is fitting, just in these neutral terms, that God shares himself with the creation. Now, actually, about the question of the necessity, one would need here to speak a lot about necessity and what types of necessity we have. Perhaps it's not the right place to discuss about this, but in any case, at some point in the Divine Names, he says that it is natural for divinity to share itself. And here one can speak about whether then divinity is free or not. Is there something dictated by its nature? I believe that this kind of dichotomies are false. Actually, we should strive to something much more unified in terms of Dionysius. But in any case, I do believe that Trinity will give us a hint as to the mystery of creation.
Great, thank you.
Can I press you a little further on that, Dr. Vasilakis? How can we understand the ascending Eros, which, as Plato would describe it in the Symposium, is a desire for something we don't have, and therefore deficiency? How can we understand that in terms of God's descending ecstatic Eros, which is not deficient? Because it seems like, well, they're pointed in opposite directions. One is based on a deficiency, one's not. So how do we understand the one in terms of the other?
Yes, very interesting question. Thank you very much. So it's not only in Plato. I mean, for Plotinus, desire, Eros, implies deficiency. Again, exactly, it is this very important notion from the Symposium. We see it in Aristophanes' speech then again in Diotima, and we can find it also in Proclus. So let me give please a bit of background in Proclus, and let us see the counterpoint in Dionysius. So if Eros implies deficiency, as in Plato and Plotinus, how can Proclus say that we can have the case of a providential Eros? How is this? The answer is the following. Eros is a divinity which wants to be united with beauty, that is, it lacks with respect to beauty and wants to be united with it. Now, qua divine entity, Eros is also providential, i.e., he transfers his characteristic property to other entities that are dependent on Eros and are lower to the hierarchical ontological scheme of Proclus. Now, because of Eros providence, then these participants can exemplify this strive to want to be united with beauty. Of course, if we take the example, for example, if we take the example of Socrates, who shares in these characteristic properties, he partakes in these gifts of God Eros, we see again that Socrates is providential towards other entities. But why is he providential? Exactly because he wants always to be united with the intelligible. So the deficiency that an entity has with respect to its progenitor or to higher entities has, as a consequence, a providential attitude toward other inferior entities. Now, Dionysius actually makes this upside down. God exemplifies Eros without having any deficiency. We said we can understand this by saying that God is Trinity. In any case, he has a superabundance, not a deficiency. And his Eros, in that, we said, he shares himself. Now, we begin then with this paradigm, let's say, downwards, Eros, which is ecstasy. But actually, in this procedure of ecstasy, the lover wants his beloved, but apart from this, the lover becomes also beloved. So he imbues love to the beloved so that the beloved can be united with God. So there is an ecstatic call, and the beloved can also answer with another ecstasy. Of course, we have the fathers of the church, for example, St. Basil the Great, he will say that we are in need of God because we are creatures, and therefore we desire God. But in the very end, I think that the scene is different from the pagan Neoplatonic one. if Eros, without any direction, is natural, so to speak, about God, then, for example, the human being, which is created according to the image of God, exactly has this characteristic, that is, be able to love. Love again with no specific direction, because if something loves God, then again, this means that it will be united with the other neighboring, for example, entities. So we have this notion of ecstasy as a call of God to creation, and then creation has this option of answering and taking part in this loving conversation with God. Of course, creation is in need of God. No way. There's no question about this. But I do believe that since our archetype has to do with love that is not related with this deficiency claim, then the natural state of the creatures is to exemplify this kind of Eros we see in the archetype. Does this a bit answer your concern, Marcus, or do you want to press me a bit more?
Well, would you say that it's the downward Eros, the ecstatic Eros, that makes the Eros as deficiency possible? Or do you think you say that we imitate God, creation imitates God, and that means that the love that some human being has is like God's love, and therefore is itself ecstatic? Mm-hmm. So is the idea that we understand love as deficiency in terms of love as ecstasy, God's love, or does God's love somehow really just eliminate the need and the desire, the deficiency altogether?
Yes, very interesting. I think, again, we need to invoke Trinity. So actually, this is a complaint of Aquinas. He says that actually we can speak about Eros in God metaphorically, because he is no need whatsoever. But I think that he misses a point in that God, as we've said many times, is Trinity. Now, one could accommodate, let's say, the concept of deficiency in that, not of course in order to say that God is deficient, but the mode of being is being in relation. A father is only father when he has a son, and the son is only son when he has a father, for instance. Now, we see that our identity, in a way, is also given, and because we participate in a dialogue. If we could accommodate, let's say, the notion of deficiency in this, okay, but I don't want to do it because of the pagan Platonic and Neoplatonic background. In any case, I believe that in the ecstatic response of the creatures, we see the same kind of working. So we could say that the creatures are deficient with respect to God, but why? Because in order to have their identity, they need to be in this loving dialogue with God. So I believe in the Dionysian case, we do not need to speak so much about being above and being below. I think that ecstasy there has to do exactly with the annihilation of the direction. If upward and downward was very important in pagan Neoplatonism, I believe because of the model of the Trinity, which actually is horizontal, we get a way to surpass this issue in pagan Neoplatonism, and hence understand why ecstasy can mean something upwards, downwards, or horizontal, or whatever. Does this picture answer, Marcus, or I have missed something from what you asked?
I think I understand a little more clearly what you mean now when you say like the direction really doesn't matter. So it's the fundamental idea with Eros for Dionysius is like an ontological unity. God is in creation, and creation needs God for its own being. That's the core idea.
Good. Of course, I wouldn't like to say that God is in need of the creation. Then we will have this talk about, is the creation necessary, for example, or something like this. But we could say that in this framework of freedom within divinity, yes, we can understand this result of a God who shares exactly his love with other creatures. And therefore, we could say, it might be a bit provocative, but in any case, that he gets complete even when he gets outside of himself, which is also termed as kenosis, emptying of itself. But that's one stage. I believe that the final stage and the final answer to this problem that you pose is also Christ, Christology. And this is why I have this complaint with respect to Pearl. So I could speak a bit more about this and with respect to this problem, but I don't know if you want to ask something else.
Please keep going.
To elaborate on this. Okay, so as with Trinity, I believe that Christology is very important to Dionysius, especially to the divine names, but again, it is given to us as a very subtle proposal. We need to do work if we want to interrelate all these themes. And I believe that what we try to do with this discussion is exactly what the fathers, like Maximus the Confessor, did with respect to Dionysius. They discussed deeply with the text. They found all these questions, these problems, and they elaborated on them with the result of, for example, St. Maximus the Confessor Christology, which is more, which is full-fledged with respect in comparison to Dionysius. Now, the cases as with Trinity in Dionysius, we see Christ, so Dionysius mentions many times Christ in the divine names, but for example, in the section about Eros, he does not mention Christ. Of course, there is another chapter, a chapter on peace, Irene, actually, which is very close in spirit with the chapters on Eros. For example, this kind of unifying result that Eros has, this is also the result of peace. So Andrew Louth says that here we have twin name of Eros as peace and also power. So, for example, in this context, Dionysius refers to Christ. But again, as I said, in the section on Eros, he does not. Why? As I said, I believe he wants us to complete the picture. Why to complete it in this vein? So sometimes in the divine names, Dionysius supposedly quotes from his teacher, the divine Hierotheus. Hierotheus is his name. 2 times we see this. The one is in the concluding chapters of the section on Eros, and another one is in the introduction with respect to Christ. We see that in the chapters on Eros, the expressions are very dense. And actually Dionysius says that what I am doing in my book is to explicate, elaborate on what my teacher has said. And actually we can laugh, let's say, here a bit, because also Dionysius' language is very dense and one needs to elaborate further on this. And this is exactly what Maximus, for example, did. So I do believe it is no coincidence that Hierotheus is quoted, as I said before, supposedly with respect to Christ and Eros. I believe that this is once more a hint for us to relate these 2 things and actually see how this works perfectly with respect to the problems of ecstasy and the erotic cycle. So, if ecstasy has nothing to do with specific direction in Dionysius' universe, and here one could be reminded of Heraclitus, who says that the way up, the way down are one and the same. There is also another fragment of Heraclitus which says that the beginning and end of the circle are the same. And in this vein, Dionysius, after speaking about God as ecstasy, he speaks about love, the love of God, as being this circular erotic force, an erotic circle, a love that starts with God, God as an efficient cause, God as lover, and a love that has as its end, again, God. God as a final cause, God as a beloved. Now, if we also accept the hints that I spoke of about Christology and the erotic section, I believe that Christ is the best exemplification of this erotic circular force, because exactly in the response of creation to the loving call of God, we have both seals, the seal of humanity, of creation, and the seal of divinity. And this is exactly what we see in the 2 natures of Christ. So I believe that in the text of Dionysius, we do get the hints in order to complete Dionysius' presentation of God also as an erotic circular force by invoking Christ. So starting with Trinity and ending, if you want, with Christ and Christology. Does this answer a bit?
Yes, let me go to Sam or Mr. Bennett. Do we want to press this any further or change directions?
I just have a very basic question. This is my office here where I do marriage therapy, which I'll have a client coming in pretty soon. So on the very basic level, but not as high-minded as these guys, Does it make any sense to talk about love without talking about a relation with God? I mean, can one have true love just on the natural level without having a relation with God?
A very interesting question. Actually, it is not only a characteristic of the Christian framework. For example, it is not only characteristic of Dionysius, but also characteristic of the whole of Neoplatonic tradition, that actually no, one cannot speak about genuine eros and friendship if one is divorced from the divine element, from this attempt to approach what is beyond us. So I do understand exactly, and also in today's time, why this is a pressing question, but not only Dionysius, but also Plotinus and Proclus, interpreting Plato, would say, no, if we want to be friends with our neighbors, for example, we need to be part of a harmonious whole. And this involves not only other human persons, for example, but also divinity. And in the case of pagan Neoplatonists, we have divinities, we have polytheism. But in any case, harmonious whole means having all these types of relations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, for Dimitrios. I wanted to ask just a little bit about about Christ. You make a distinction between defiled and undefiled providence, and if I understand it, you were saying that if you misunderstand Christ as engaging in undefiled providence, then Christ would kind of be secondary. But when you realize that there's like an element of defiled providence, he becomes more central. And anyway, would you mind explaining that distinction between undefiled and defiled providence?
Yes, of course, Sam. Thank you very much. And actually, this is for me at least, a very interesting topic. This is why I have also made it into a paper, apart from the book. So this has also to do again with the Proclean background. So there are some claims, important claims in the symposium. In the beginning of Diotimus' teaching, we get the information, so to speak, that God or gods do not mingle with men. So anthropos ou theo ou megnete. So there is no mixture between them. They cannot come together. In the end of Diotimus' ascent, also the second ascent, which is more dense, we read that the beauty, therefore the form of beauty, is actually something which is devoid of mixture. Amikton und uk anapleon sarkos. It has nothing to do, for example, with materiality. Again, it is this idea that divinity might be in a relation to our cosmos, but not in a way that would mix these two levels. We see this also in the case of Alcibiades and Socrates, because we have also this infamous episode from the symposium that Alcibiades made it that Socrates slept in his house on his bed, and the next day it was like a father having slept with his son. So Socrates would avoid any physical contact with someone else. And this also, again, is consonant with this thought that the divine element cannot mingle with something which is lower in hierarchy. Now, in the case of Christ, this is exactly what is again inverted. Exactly in Christianity, we see that actually God does mingle with men in the person of Christ. The problem is, however, again, the language that Dionysius uses a language reminiscent of Proclus, who would say that divinities, for example, the Henads on the top, right below the one, we can speak more about this, exercise providence with respect to the inferior beings, but in a way which is asketos, so without assuming any relation with them, so being detached. Now, the problem is the following. So actually, for Dionysius then, if he uses identical language as Proclus, Christ is a kind of secondary figure or not. For him, what is the important is that God has just a providence and Christ is just an example, but not an important one. Here, I get also help from a comment from that actually is from St. Maximus the Confessor, because actually we have a set of scholia to the Dionysian corpus. The tradition had thought that these were written by Maximus. Actually, we know that most of them were by John of Scythopolis, and a number of them is due to Maximus the Confessor, and some other people also, one or two, to John Philoponus. And now we have a critical edition by Zoukla of the Scholia, which answers all these problems. And in any case, a scholar by Maximus helps here, because he says that when also Dionysius says that the Eros of God is unrelated asketos with respect to creation, this has to do with the fact that there is no kinship with respect to nature between God and creation. That is, God is uncreated, of uncreated nature, and creation is of another nature. That is, yes, we have two natures in Christ, but these are unconfused. Asynchitos is the term. And so we can read then this asketos of Dionysius, which also features in Proclus, exactly as providing this very important for the Christian context qualification, that yes, God does mingle with man, but in an unconfused way. And so in this way, I believe Dionysius can show his affinity also with the Proclean background, but at the same time incorporate all these insights that can make us see all this very precious, let's say, or innovating doctrine that Christianity can offer. And I think that this is why he's also very interesting.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you for that answer. It kind of, while you're saying that, it reminds me of, you know, they say Marx turned Hegel on his head. It's kind of some of what you're saying. It's like Dionysius turned Neoplatonism on its head at some points. It seems like. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yes, yes. But and the interesting thing is that he does not reject pagan Neoplatonism. So he embraces, in an erotic, let's say, way, pagan Neoplatonism. But for example, he baptizes, so to speak, this. And I think it is as if Dionysius was saying, look, Proclus is an excellent interlocutor. See that if someone also has some insights from Paul, for example, or from Herodotus, look what an interesting conversation and interesting results one could have.
Right. Thank you. Well, I mean, in terms of the baptizing Proclus, I don't know if you wanted, I could bring up potentially, I could screen share Proposition 65, and maybe you could make a couple comments on that. It was just one of the more rich kind of point, or what I thought was a very rich kind of discussion in your book on Proposition 65. So maybe I could just, I don't know, whatever you want to say about it, just I could screen share it maybe. And
yes, I also have my book here, so I'm ready.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, here it is. Yeah, so I guess in this proposition, we have this kind of famous distinction between, I guess the way Dodds puts it is that we can think of either of a character as, in terms of its, as a seminal potentiality within the cause, or you can think of a character like beauty, in terms of a particular, which kind of has a pale reflection of beauty. And then Proclus has this intermediate idea that, well, also you're going to have the character, I think existentially, where it's like fully manifested in a distinct class of beings. Anyway, and then you connect this to Dionysius. I don't know if you want to discuss it a little bit for us.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. Yes, I already mentioned this proposition 65. Yes, which is actually, it is parallel to another statement in the same book, in proposition 103, which is this very famous dictum: everything is in everything, but according to its proper manner. So yes, we can see that Proclus acknowledges the general pattern of a triadic structure. Now, in the middle, we have an entity which is participated by other entities. In the middle, this entity exemplifies, for example, beauty, and the entities that participate in this entity, for example, in beauty, they also exemplify beauty, but not in this fully fledged manner of this medium entity. Now, of course, this medium entity is also dependent upon another entity. And it is the case that this also higher entity, the third, so to speak, where we have this kataitian, this causal mode of existence, this entity might not exemplify beauty, but of course can imply it, for example. And this is why Dodds speak about this seminal possibility, which then is fully fledged in another entity. So, for example, in my chapter on Proclus, I say the following, that if we see the effects of the one, these are actually that things can be unified and actually be friendly with one another. That is, these features are also erotic. So we could say that also in Proclus' case, the one is causally erotic. It does not exemplify Eros, but it has these characteristics, which it is unifying result, which in a lower level of reality will be Eros καθύπαρξιν, exemplifying Eros. So yes, we have this causal mode where an entity just implies the existence of a feature. We see this feature in a lower entity being exemplified, and then in the third instance, we have other entities participating in this entity exemplifying this. Now, it is interesting. I think this also is of your concern. There is this big discussion about self-predication in Plato. So, for example, Gregory Vlastos thought that this was a problem for Plato, or at least for the period of Plato that Vlastos thought that it is the middle period, that he held on to self-predication. That is, a form of largeness is in itself large. Then what to say about this? And therefore, we have all the problems that we see in the first part of the Parmenides of Plato. In any case, we see also that self-predication is an aspect of the Neoplatonic interpretation of Plato, but it is much more elaborate than in Vlastos' interpretation of Plato. And of course, okay, with respect to the form of largeness, of course, the Neoplatonists would have other answers to say about this, that the extension has to do with matter and so on. They have elaborate answers, and there will be no problem about this. But self-predication can be an aspect of the Neoplatonic, the pagan Neoplatonic hierarchy, which of course could be seen within, for example, the spectacles of this proposition, having an entity exemplifying a characteristic, but also being dependent upon another entity, which is the source of the characteristic, but that entity does not exemplify this characteristic. Is this okay with respect to the Proclus background, Sam?
Yeah, so just quickly, so would Proclus say that in a way the form of the beautiful is not beautiful, in the sense that instead there's going to be a middle layer that's going to exemplify beauty? Or would Proclus subscribe to the idea that yes, you can self-predicate beauty of the beautiful? Just to be clear.
Yeah. I would say that with respect to the beautiful, yes, he would say that there is this self-predication. Of course, the form of beauty, this divine entity, is beautiful in an eminent way, which transcends us. We need to make an attempt, an ascesis, in order to try to come as close as we can to the beautiful. But yes, it can exemplify this characteristic.
Okay, great. And so, yeah, so could we talk about, how Dionysius deals with this? So I guess he will identify, instead of separating two of them, he's going to actually say in God, he's both cause and exemplifying the characteristic, if I understand right. But yeah.
Yes. So we know that Dionysius is aware of this very proposition, we see this triadic distinction in his 9th letter. For example, we see this kataitian, kathyparxin, and katametochen. So mode of being by participation. However, the system, so to speak, of Dionysius is more frugal, more synoptic than Proclus's system. And apart from these triadic structures, we have also binary structures. For example, lover and beloved, God and what is the result from God. Now, with respect also to Eros, for example, and my treatment there, I noted that many times Dionysius says that God is Eros kataitian, etiodos, as a cause, but also God exemplifies Eros. And in that sense, we can say that for Dionysius, these two levels, kataitian, the causal mode, and the existential mode, are identified with respect to God. Again, one answer would be the following: God is Eros in a causal mode because he is Trinity, intertrinitarian relations, and he also exemplifies Eros when in contact, in relation to the cosmos. Here he exemplifies it existentially and causally because he has these internal relations, and therefore he is Eros. So we can say that within this binary scheme, the causal and the existential mode can be identified and be in a kind of dialectics with the mode by participation. But again, the interesting thing, okay, my interpretation, so to speak, is that as soon as Dionysius gets to the idea of Eros as circle, a circular form stemming from God, going out of God and coming back to God, then also in a way, the mode by participation can be also identified with the existential mode. Because in the very end, we said that it is this love that God has, which he imbues to the creation, and then creation comes back, returns to God. So one would say that actually also what is the result of Eros, that Dionysius attempts to unify these distinctions. Of course, also the pagan Neoplatonists want to do this, to unify sometimes the distinctions, but I think that this is a very good example to see that Dionysius is not a plagiarizer of Proclus. He has read Proclus, he deems Proclus admittedly as a very important personality, but again, according to the context, according to his argument, he adopts something plus adapting it and being critical to it. And I think this is why it is very interesting to see Dionysius as a very critical and very imaginative reader of Proclus.
Great, thank you. Very fascinating how you brought in the issue of the Trinity there as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Can I follow that up, Dr. Vasilakis? I'm worried that by describing God as Eros or beauty existentially, and therefore saying that God exemplifies beauty, that we might be demoting God to the level of a creature. Because it seems like God, for Dionysius, well, God doesn't seem like God just is beauty, or really is beyond beauty for Dionysius. Isn't it things in creation that exemplify beauty other than God exemplifying beauty? Does that question make sense?
Yes, of course. And thank you very much. You also mentioned again something important that we see also in the vocabulary of Dionysius, that, for example, he says that God is kaloni, God is kalos, beautiful, but also he's hyper kalos. He's super beautiful, beautiful in this eminent manner, which transcends everything that we could perceive. Now, I do believe, again, that this can be seen within the framework we set out with respect to proposition 65, that actually his hyperkalos, for example, super beautiful, in that he is also the cause of beauty, and he's also beautiful, for example, because he exemplifies a beauty, although, of course, in this eminent manner. That is self-predication. Again, yes, we have also self-predication with respect to God. Now, it is true that because of participation in God, creation can have some of its characteristics. But again, it is because these characteristics have their cause, but also their paradigmatic, so to speak, exemplification in God. And again, Eros is a very interesting example. Eros is, God is the Eros par excellence, the paradigm of Eros, also due to the background we have in the Testament, in the scripture, that God is love, in St. John the Theologian, for example, and in a way, the participants try to imitate this God, this love of God. But again, here another footnote, which is also in the book, is that we don't see the formula hyper eros, super eros, with respect to God or to any other participant. So although he speaks about hyperkalos, about something being super beautiful, in the case of Eros, he does not do this. And I believe an interpretation I have given is that because Eros is symmetrical, so it is not only that God exemplifies beauty, but Eros implies this dialogue with the creation, that for this reason, because we have something which involves at least two members, we have this simpler ascription of Eros without using this hyper, super formula. So I think this again has to do with this kind of upside down in Dionysius' case, that we see paradigmatic exemplifications in divinity, but not only in abstract manner, but also in the sense of self-predication, something that sometimes interpreters would want, in the case of Plato, to avoid. And therefore, we can understand why creation created in the image of God can have similarities with divinity. Does this answer your worry, Marcus?
Well, let me, if we were to say something like Helen of Sparta is beautiful,
yes,
and then we were to say God is beautiful, in God's case, we would be saying that beauty is beautiful, so there'd be self-predication. But you're arguing, as I take it, that when we say God is beautiful, we're speaking in a different mode. Preeminent, God is preeminently beautiful, so we're speaking in a different mode from when we say Helen of Sparta is beautiful. Is that
yes,
the idea?
Course.
So it's not, if I remember correctly, when Vlastos talks about self-predication, he thinks of a form of beauty being beautiful in the same sense that Helen of Sparta is beautiful, and that leads to all kinds of problems. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So Vlastos wants to argue in order to understand the third man argument, for example, the Parmenides, and says that it is only when we say that it is there is self-predication in the form of beauty, but the form of beauty is beautiful. Plus, we have things in the sensible world that are beautiful. Then if all these things are beautiful, we need to postulate another form, which will be the cause of beauty. And then we will be having this reductio. So this ingressus ad infinitum. So yes, so I don't think, however, that also in this Vlastosian interpretation, we would say that one could say that the form of beauty is more beautiful or beautiful in another way than the Helen of Troy. And in any case, with respect to the Christian case, God is beautiful in that he is the object of desire. He attracts all creation towards him. This is, for example, why we can ascertain that he is beautiful. Of course, one can be attracted by a beautiful woman, yes, but in the case of God, this is an eminent way, and a way that perhaps does not have many things to do as in our earthly existence. Although, of course, we also have Christ, who is also, according to the hymnology, the most beautiful among men. Does this answer the problem with Vlastos? So Vlastos talks about analytic logical problems in Plato, but I think that in a larger Christian framework, we don't have these logical problems. So I think it would be unfair to compare Helen with God. But what in both cases we see is that there is an attraction. But in the case of God, when one has understood or tries to understand what God is, the source of life, for example, then the attraction is much starker. For other people that think with respect only to this realm, in both pagan Neoplatonism and in the Christian framework, then these people would be attracted only from the visible beauty, and they will miss that there is also something which is invisible but might be much more beautiful than what they see with their eyes. In order also to paraphrase again Heraclitus, that the invisible harmony is much better than the visible one. So Marcus now is perhaps a bit more clear, or you still?
I think so. Could we put it in terms of an analogy? Helen is beautiful and God is beautiful, but yes. Helen is beautiful only analogously to how God is beautiful. So there's a similarity of sense, but they're not, the two terms beautiful are not just equivocal either. Some kind of analogy there?
Yes, yes, of course, and I think that this is also a way that also Thomas Aquinas, for example, uses with respect also to the apophatic approach to God, that we ascribe characteristics to God from our experience, or actually we find them in the scripture, but we need to try to understand them in this preeminent way or in an analogical way. Yes, I wouldn't have any problem with this, but I think it's important to see that in both cases there is attraction. So it's not a pure theory here. It's not a denigrated beauty. Actually, it's a full-fledged beauty. But because it is eminent in this way, we can also respond in a way that can change all our life.
Right. So Helen's beauty is only an imitation of God's beauty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, it has some characteristics, yes. We could say this, but of course it is not complete. So, for example, being beautiful in the case of God means also being Eros, means also being sacrificial. So would Helen be sacrificial? The tradition would say that that it was quite the opposite. So I think that if we want to see this within this framework of ascribing goodness, love, beauty, wisdom, all these to God, then we would see that the one imply the other, for example. Whereas in our case, this is much more fragmentary.
Yes, okay. Thank you for your clarification. Now, we have been talking for a little bit over an hour and a half now, I think. I don't want to take all your time. So should we finish up? Would you like to, I don't know, make any last comments on your project, or, I don't know, future work on Dionysius you might have in the works?
Okay.
Or just anything?
First of all, I want to thank you very, very, very much for this invitation, which has honored me and has made me very, very happy. And I found also some people, actually Umberto Eco, I think he said that he was sure that there was at least one man in the world that had read his book about the name of the rose, and this was either the translator or the one that wrote the script for the movie. In any case, I am sure that there are people who have read my book and I am grateful to this. Thank you very much for all these detailed and so well thought questions. And with all this variety, you have given me the opportunity actually to speak about the whole chapter of Dionysius and make interconnections. So really, thank you.
Thank you for coming and talking with us this afternoon, afternoon for us now, I guess, as well. It's been a really fascinating discussion and a lot to think about, to continue thinking about. Does anyone else have any final thoughts or questions, comments? Sam, Mr. Bennett, before we hang up? All right, well, thank you.
Very enriching and very fascinating, and most of it was new to me, a little bit over my head, but very exhilarating, and I really appreciate the invite, and you guys got to get organized. And thank you, Doctor, for doing this. It's great.
Thank you, Dr. Vasilakis, and look forward to speaking with you again sometime, perhaps.
I thank you very much, and well done with respect to your initiative, the Dionysius Circle. It is fantastic, and I wish every best with respect also to whatever you do individually, but also within this collective scheme. Every best. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.